And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Loyalty Leader Insights by Loyalty Summit. You can find more about Loyalty Summit at loyaltysummit.com. Also, follow us on LinkedIn. Let me get this in now at the beginning of the webcast. Follow us on LinkedIn. That's going to be the place where you're going to find all the information about our future webcasts, past replays, including of today as well. Today, I am joined by Hubert Frage, who's the former VP of Marketing for Lufthansa, and the Senior VP for the Commercial Operations for Emirates. And really glad to have you here, Hubert, because we want to infuse a bit of the commercial angle to loyalty today. So you're going to be a great addition. And Nick Lamming, who's going to be familiar to a lot of you as well, is the former head of loyalty at Cebu Pacific, and also formerly SVP of AMEA in Asia Pacific as well. So a lengthy list of loyalty experience behind both of these gentlemen as well. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. To our audience, remember Q&As are available for you. Please feel free to submit your questions. We'll try to get to them during the session. And if we don't get to them all during the session, don't forget there'll be a follow-up on traveldatadaily.com as well afterwards. Let's get straight into it. I'll let you guys have a minute to quickly introduce yourselves and give us your quick take of loyalty today in your view. Hubert, let's start with you.
Well, as you already said, David, thank you first of all for having me. It's really a pleasure. Always great to be on a show such like the Loyalty Summit. And as you said, my last role was with Emirates Airline. I built there the global sales organization, and I also was responsible for all markets in the Americas, Europe, and Africa. And as you also rightly said, I have some experience, certainly on the loyalty side of the business, from my role as VP Marketing at Lufthansa a couple of years ago. Well, jumping into the topic right away, loyalty. I personally believe the next coming months, if not years, will be a great space for loyalty. When you look where we are right now in the COVID-19 crisis situation, we need a jump start. And I think that loyalty programs will be able to deliver that jump start, given the fact that you certainly need to see appropriate redemption space availability. But I really believe that loyalty and the member base of loyalty programs will be actually the train that will pull the locomotive that will pull the train out of the crisis.
Mm-hmm. Nick, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that the idea of it being a locomotive that pulls the train out of the crisis is quite a good image, because I think that providing there's a train to pull in a number of the airlines are struggling, and I think all the talk at the moment tends to be about cash. I think there's been some very good behaviour with regards to cash. If you take the Virgin Australia example, where cash is ring fenced, so they haven't sort of dipped into the till and stripped it bare as we saw with Ansett many years ago. So there's been some good behaviour. There's also been some more questionable behaviour around shutting off redemption, where cash has been earned from banks and other partners in the majority. But then when it comes to redemption, with the main redemption option of flying being shut down, then programs have tended to shy away from allowing redemption or restricted it. I'm not sure that really sends the message that we want, although it may be a necessity. So providing there's a train to pull, I think that loyalty and the data that is available to us will be a big engine for driving us out of the crisis.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point. And I mean, the airlines themselves, I mean, to stick with the metaphor of the train to pull, I mean, the airlines themselves and IATA have not been shy over the last 8 weeks of claiming that the sky is falling. And that it's desperate times, desperate measures are required, and we should forgive all manner of desperate measures by airlines because all bets are off. Now, we've certainly discussed in the past about things like the refunds, and you certainly bring up about the redemptions. And it's an interesting point because it keeps coming up week after week in the discussion as well. Is this concern about shutting off redemptions? Again, to use another metaphor, it's, cutting your nose to spite your face. It's programs and brands will actually end up, it will cost them more in the medium to long term by doing so than any potential immediate short-term, I don't want to say gain, but benefit from being able to hold on to that small amount of cash. Now, at the other extreme, if we think about airlines like, before they shut everything off and kind of press the pause button, there is a concern, of course, that there could be this run on the bank. And whilst in theory, third-party redemptions for things like gift cards, for example, are generally actually quite cheap for an airline or a hotel, or, generally speaking, any loyalty program. They're a very, very low-cost redemption or merchandise from the store. It's one of the reasons they exist. So even though the redemption itself could be profitable for those particular points that were earned and then redeemed, it's still literally the brand is still writing a check. The loyalty program is still writing a check. And if you're the CFO and you're basically saying nobody gets $1, it's understandable where it comes from. But I want to talk about the long-term impact on loyalty. And, we've talked a bit about redemptions, but let's move on a little bit from that, because the topic of this week's webinar is balancing member revenue versus program profits. So let's move away from the immediacy right now of where we are with the crisis and talk a little bit more generally. I mean, we've seen, before this crisis came along, we've certainly had boom times. Our airlines have been going reasonably well, with the exception of perhaps the low-cost carrier war across the Atlantic. If we put that to the side, load factors across the world have been very high. Aviation and industry had been, soaring, excuse the pun. Loyalty programs felt, actually maybe that's a little unfair, brands felt that they could devalue their loyalty programs. And in some cases, actually quite significantly, in some cases multiple times, and without hurting them too much. And the reasoning simply being that, especially for established mature brands with large co-brand relationships, the sheer quantum of revenue coming in from co-brand relationships has been sufficient to well and truly mask any erosion of loyalty amongst some segments of members due to devaluation of the programs. Is that a fair statement? Would you agree, disagree? Do you want to add any comments to kind of, before we continue in the discussion, I want to make sure we're sort of all on the same page with, do we agree that that's sort of where we're at pre-crisis?
I think from my perspective, we've evolved. These programs have evolved from being cost center model, where the airline or the mother brand was funding a program of rewards and benefits and incentives to keep customers happy and keep them coming back. And they've evolved into profit generation machines. But that profit's not coming from arbitrage contribution from the airline or the mother brand versus redemption. It's actually coming from external partners. So banks really have been at the very heart of driving profit into loyalty programs and from loyalty programs. But also I think that the airlines and the operators have become quite addicted to the revenues that come in. You're talking big money, you're talking billions of dollars in some cases, and it's very profitable revenue as well. So, and it acts as a distribution channel for the airline or for the mother brand. So if it's set up correctly, then it becomes a very nice addition to an organization because it's profitable in its own right. It's generating revenues from companies outside of the original mother brand or the airline, and it's increasing the valuation or how it's viewed of these companies as well, because And that's before we get to the benefits of the data and everything else. So just in terms of pure revenue streams and an asset, these programs are very, very attractive in this new model. And that's why I think it's very important that these brands conserve them, look after them, nurture them during this period so that they don't wreck it for when they come out by taking some sort of short-term gains.
Yeah, David, I fully agree with and echo what Nick mentioned. I mean, the big deals with the financial institutions. So in general, the non-core revenue stream, but primarily, the revenue stream coming from banks is driving the talk of the day. And I mean, you and I, we are both here based in the US, and it has a significant impact also on the stock evaluation of the airlines running these big programs and also running the big deals with the bank. However, certainly you lose a little bit track of bread and butter business. And that is really kind of, taking care of the customer, taking care of the traveler, of the frequent traveler, who goes after miles, who goes after recognition and status through the ordinary travel experience or flight event. So the balance there, I think, has to be right.
It's interesting. And I think, when I think about different markets, and obviously when we talk about co-brand revenue, the US market is at the top of the tree there. We have other global airlines like, BA, Lufthansa, Qantas, they're always at the top of those league tables, if you will, of, revenue generated from co-brand relationships. But if I think about certain geographies with extensive on the ground earn and redemption partners, there's always this kind of, light-hearted reference, and I think sometimes it's not necessarily made in the most positive light, but that they're frequent spender programs as opposed to frequent flyer programs, or they're frequent buyer programs, because in a lot of cases, almost 2/3, if not more, of points and miles are actually earned on the ground, through banks and credit cards, through grocery and and gas or petrol partners, pharmacies, insurance, you name it. I mean, Nick, some of these programs literally have hundreds of on-the-ground earning partners, and that doesn't include any redemption options. So when we think about, Hubert, you mentioned bread and butter, we think about what about your actual traditional frequent flyer, and frequent flyer could be anybody who flies, once a year, but, perhaps is religiously loyal to the one airline. Perhaps that airline has 100% of their share of wallet and has had for the last 20 years. And this person flies once a year with whatever airline it is, and they've never thought twice about a different airline. Very loyal customer, not necessarily high revenue, but very loyal. On the other end of the extreme, you have your very top corporate travelers, spending, tens of thousands of dollars a year or more. In many cases, they are managed corporate travelers. They may not actually be the traveler or the person influencing the travel decision, or even the decision to travel. May all be decided by people above their pay grade. Now, well, maybe not above their pay grade, but in a different position in the organization, perhaps. And the question comes to then, when we think about frequent flyer programs or loyalty programs generally, and they don't necessarily have to be airlines, but obviously airlines are the easiest example to work with here. We have loyalty on one side of the equation, and that is, if we define loyalty by share of wallet, I give, regardless of how often I fly, I give 100% of my share of wallet to a particular airline. Very loyal. On the other side of the equation, I give $1 gazillion a year to a particular airline. I'm very high value. Now, maybe I'm giving all of my money to the one airline, but maybe I'm also giving $1 gazillion to this other airline over here. I'm only giving 50% to your airline, but I'm one of your most valuable customers because I spend the most. Should loyalty programs be going after both of those people? Should they be looking after both of those people? And obviously I appreciate there's a huge range in between. Or should there be a focus? And if there's a focus only on one, should it be at the expense of the other? Hubert, let's start with your thoughts on that one.
That depends what you want to be as a program. Okay. And it's interesting that you use the term loyalty already and not frequent flyer program in the case of the airlines. or hospitality loyalty program in terms of hotel offers. If you want to be a loyalty program, I think you definitely need a broad membership base. You have to have propositions both on the earn on burn side for different various segments in your program. Only then you are a real loyalty program for the heavy spender and also for the low spender with kind of infrequent flights. In my opinion, in a loyalty program, engagement is important. Engagement delivers data. Nick mentioned that I think the asset of having a lot of data is an asset that you can monetize as well, very valuable. So yeah, you need a broad and engaged member base. It's a good thing. And in the case of many airlines, I mean, flight redemptions are only available for maybe kind of the minority of the percentage of the member base. So certainly for infrequent flyers, you have to come up with innovative solutions to become relevant. Last week you had James Curry from Emirates on the show, and I think he spoke about cash and miles offers as a mean to really become relevant for infrequent flyers, to engage them and to make the program proposition or to give the program proposition a certain stickiness. I have to come also back once again to the crisis situation we're in right now. I have to say you have to cater to all segments, because if you cater to all segments, you simply diversify also your exposure. I think last week on your show, you discussed a little bit what kind of segments, what kind of customer behavior will come back first. And I think the group agreed a little bit, maybe business travel, corporate travel might come back, but nobody knows if it comes back at the same level. That is also for me kind of, a driver of the consideration that you will need a broad set of membership, including the infrequent flyers, but you have to design the right products for them.
I think it's a great point. Just before we go to you, Nick, sorry to jump in there, but since last week, I was just reading some more things yesterday. I mean, we've had, I think a few people have come out in the last week, since last week's show, with more commentary, people who I think should know what's going on, or at least have a better finger on the pulse than we do in earnings calls from some of the big airlines and things. And the consensus seems to be growing that two points that I think are key takeaways. Leisure travel will probably lead the recovery. I think there is a consensus that business travel will have some form of a lag. To your point, Hubert, about what level it comes back is still completely up in the air. But I think, even, Ed Bastian, the CEO of Delta, I think on the recent earnings call made commentary, along the lines of concern that, this is very different to previous, predictions of the demise of business travel because of video conferencing. But, in the circumstances we're in, the reality is technology has come of age. Businesses are realizing, and flyers are realizing that they don't have to get on a plane for a lot of meetings. And, it's not a preference issue now. They've been forced to do it. It's been proven whether they like it or not that they can. And I think, when you have an organization, an airline as big as Delta, acknowledging publicly to the market that they expect a permanent or very long-term lag due to the ability of remote working tools, I think that I think it's a big red flag on managed business travel, in the sense that you can't simply put all the eggs in that basket now and assume that you can ignore other segments, or if you do, I mean, you have to accept that it's going to be a smaller basket. Nick, put you in the hot seat.
I won't comment on that. I don't actually agree necessarily. That I think that SMEs and anyone that allows their corporate travelers via a policy, there'll be a clamor to travel. I think people will be back on aircraft. The business traveler has a far bigger incentive to travel than leisure. They're less price sensitive. They have a shorter booking window. I think we'll see people back on planes, and they've got less fear, because they do it all the time. So I think we're much more likely to see them than oh, I'll take a weekend break to a city somewhere on an aircraft, I'm probably going to think twice about that, especially with pricing being so high. But anyway, let me go back to the original question, which is,
Sure.
I think that measurement has a big part to play here, in that if you're focusing on the frequent or high value traveler, and that's the basis of your program, your CFO is going to shut the program down. And the reason for that is that they will say, show me the profit or the extra revenue that this program has brought in. And it's very, very hard to justify. We've done matched samples of members versus non-members, and we've shown 15% lift between members and non-members in a matched sample over a 12-month period. But the fact is, you take that to the CFO and he says, okay, show me where that is in this P&L. Mm-hmm. And you can't answer that question. So one of the only measures you can use is, what is the profit being generated from sale of points or commissions or other revenue sources from this program that make it worthwhile. So I think that it's very important that you do target the leisure or the infrequent traveler, especially for LCCs. I set up and ran a program for an LCC, and the model of we'll focus on frequent flyers just wouldn't have gone anywhere, because 2% of the base would be considered a more than once a year flyer. So sure. you cannot build a program on that basis. So what you have to do is build a program with a broader appeal, a far bigger ecosystem, different economics to appeal to these infrequent travelers. But then suddenly they become very valuable to you. As a program, the frequent flyer may not be that valuable to you, because it's actually the big spender. So you're absolutely right in what you were saying, is that, are these big spender programs? Well, yes, they are, because when you look at the books of all of the loyalty programs, the money's not coming from the airline. It's coming from sale of points to banks. It's coming from insurance commissions. It's coming from, and I'm more ambitious when it comes down to what these programs can do, in that because I didn't have a nice big fat co-brand portfolio that I could rely on. So you have to be looking to build other businesses, other revenue streams, whether that's an insurance business, whether it's a data business, whether it's a media business, on top of that traditional model of selling points to banks. That's where you have to be. And I think these programs, in order to survive that conversation with the board of the mother brand or the airline, they have to be solid businesses in their own right, and they have to compete with these digital disruptors, whether it's Uber or Grab in this region, where they're building a big database and then they're selling products to it. Well, and they have digital channels. That there's not a lot of difference in my mind, other than we have a profitable underlying model to a Grab and Uber type business model, and the modern next generation of loyalty program that we're building and using.
So Nick, to your okay, maybe we don't agree that business travel will lag and that leisure travel will lead the recovery. When we think about business travel, though, I mean, there's more than one segment within business travel, right? And this, I'm thinking, tying your 2 points together here is, and tell me if I get any of this wrong, but it leads me to think that you've got, okay, at the top end, you've got your managed corporate traveler. They don't influence the travel decision. They don't make the travel decision. They don't, there are perhaps incentives from the airline to the corporate to actually win that managed contract. And Hubert, I might come to you in a few minutes to get some opinion on some incentives in the sales channel, but put that aside for the second. But within business travelers, you also have, I mean, Nick, you mentioned SMEs. I mean, typically SMEs aren't always top tier travelers. A lot of cases they're perhaps in those mid tiers, you know, your sort of gold tiers in programs, if you will. You know, often, you know, the money's coming out of their pocket. If they are an SME, it's coming directly out of the owner's pocket. So you might not be splurging on first class fares, but instead buying discount economy fares because, you know, again, everything hits the bottom line when you're the owner of a small business, you know, and very self-selecting in the travel decision. When we think about that type of segment, you know, and we're thinking about, you know, what we talked about earlier in conversation. I mean, I know we start with the extremes, targeting your top customers versus your infrequent traveler. But what if we just narrow it down to business travelers? You've got your managed corporates, and then you've got your, perhaps I'm going to get your unmanaged business travelers. But in a lot of cases, with the moves programs have made in recent years, you know, where if you buy the cheapest fares, you don't really earn much in the way of frequent flyer points and miles. When we think about the recognition program, the elite status program, with minimum spend requirements added in, even if you're literally on a plane 5 times a week, if you're not buying expensive fares, you're probably never going to reach higher levels of status. You know, is it actually that mid-tier small business self-funded traveler that is actually the one who's been hurt the most by program devaluations? But also, is that person the person who can potentially offer the most incremental uplift in spend if they are correctly incentivized? Nick, I'll start back with you.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right again, in that the discretionary spend in travel isn't with the big corporates with managed agreements. Frankly, if the loyalty program wasn't running, they'd still be flying with the airline and spending the same amount of money. Mm-hmm. The really big uplift is going to become from anyone that has discretionary spend. The other thing that I think has been out of whack for a while, and you mentioned it, is that status and tiers are given to people that fly business class on expensive fares. So are we missing something in the way that we're allocating tiers? Again, we saw that it's incredibly valuable for that corporate traveler who may not have any discretion in who they travel with, but could be pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars through their credit card, earning points in their preferred program, which will inevitably be the one that they travel on business because it makes the most sense. Mm. So I think that we should be looking at those tiers and soft benefits, and we call them soft benefits, but they're real, and they're real emotional connection with people as ways of incentive, or not incentivizing, but keeping people traveling with you even when times are tough and maybe there's price competition and so on. So I think the way that we manage tiers, the way that we give tiers and earning of status should change, and we should take a more all-encompassing look at that, because it's a very interesting currency and much stronger connection if you can build that sort of emotional loyalty.
It's an interesting point, just before I come to you here, but I mean, it's an interesting point you make, because in a lot of cases, when you look at airlines across the world and you look at the elite recognition program, so, you know, the benefits of having elite status, in a lot of cases, elite status, the benefits that you get, they approximate what you would get if you were buying a premium cabin airfare, if you were buying business class or you were buying first class, or in a hotel, if you were booking into the suite. You know, a lot of those inclusions are what elite status gives you. So if you're somebody who's actually always buying and paying cash for business class and first class fares, you may not actually be getting a lot of additional incremental benefit from elite status, because things like, lounge access, for example, or priority check-in, priority security, a lot of those benefits are actually bundled in with those premium airfares. So you actually would get the biggest benefit from having elite status when you're flying at the back of the airplane, when your fare otherwise wouldn't entitle you to those benefits. So at least in the manner in which elite status is currently constructed. So I take your point that, you know, maybe something that loyalty managers should be taking away is hey, maybe we need to relook at the entire way that we structure elite status, allocate benefits, and who it's designed to actually incent. But let's come to you, and just to layer into that, to Nick's comments, because obviously there's a wealth of information there. Do we actually have 3 programs in loyalty programs? Do we actually have a reward program with the points and miles, a recognition program with the elite status benefit, and a co-brand program when it comes to the third-party revenue coming into programs?
Thanks for the question, David. Before I answer, just one remark to what you just discussed also with Nick about, status design and do we design status today the right way? You have certainly, you looked certainly only at the kind of, the accrual, the upfront, the flight event of the status. But there's certainly also a redemption side of the status where I think many programs have immense value for the status holder in terms of, certain availability to redemption awards and things like that. So you have to see, where's the balance. Not everything can be anyway purchased today just because of, you buy a fare in first class or in business class, and you have the same availability and access to those benefits. But coming back to your question, yeah, certainly, I think we have kind of 3 programs in one. I think a program today carries for different member segments. And the member segments engage, in various ways also with the propositions, the earn and burn propositions. There is probably even, a 4th slice in that mix. And because when you speak about the reward component, it's certainly also sliceable into airline reward and non-core awards, means lifestyle awards. So I believe, yes, definitely. We have more than only one program in a program.
So, Hubert, just taking, carrying on from that, and again, sticking with the theme we sort of started with, again, the 2 extremes, your high spending business traveler or corporate traveler on one end, or managed corporate travel on one end, your infrequent flyer on the other end, who may or may not be loyal in terms of percent of share of wallet, but let's just call them a once-a-year flyer. And let's just assume that that's the only data we have. They're a once-a-year flyer. We know they're going to fly. In the US, they're going to fly at Thanksgiving every year. Elsewhere in the world, maybe it's to see grandma for their birthday or something like. It doesn't really matter. In the Asia Pacific market, we have Chinese New Year travelers. There's no shortage of once-a-year travelers across the geographies of the world where we know we're going to have peak times to accommodate them. But when we think about those 2 extremes of your once-a-year traveler and your, very regular high-spending managed corporate traveler, what happens when they're the same person? Or let me rephrase them. Let me say leisure traveler buying the cheapest economy fares, traveling with the family, and your managed corporate traveler traveling on a high frequency, expensive shuttle flights between Melbourne and Sydney, Berlin and London, Boston, New York. What happens when they're the same person?
I think they are the same person. The reality out there is the hybrid customer. The reality out there in the marketplace is a road warrior on the road between Monday and Friday, and then spending discretionary money for travel on the weekends with family, alone, for different travel purposes. So I believe that's more a task and a challenge for the appropriate targeting, for the appropriate messaging, for rolling out the appropriate propositions on the earn and burn side. So I really believe this is more something, what kind of message, what kind of offer will you give these different personalities in one customer? And I think, when you speak about the road warrior, I think the bias will be more on, status, benefits, and when you are more on the side, on the end of the leisure traveler, the occasional traveler, it might be messaging and targeting in terms of once in a lifetime upgrade award.
Yeah. Yep. Nick, just before I go to you, let me do a quick plug for next week. Next week, on the 5th of May, we're going to be talking about reinventing loyalty programs. And we have some great guests next week. And Dave Canty is going to be back to host the session next week. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And on the 12th of May, we are going to be talking about managing loyalty across industries and why travel loyalty is different. A lot of people always want to, look, we're always talking about airlines and hotels. What about everybody else? And I think that's going to be a great session as well. And just a quick reminder, for next week, we're actually going to be running the session a couple of hours early. So just keep an eye out on the posts and the registration page so you don't miss the session next week. Nick, what happens when the top revenue traveler and the leisure traveler are the same person?
Yeah, for me, I'm sort of going to echo what Hubert said in that it's about the data. We should be understanding these people from the data that they provide us. If they fly with us once a year, but they have a co-brand card with us, or we have some other partner where we get data, then we actually know if they're traveling more times because we can see foreign spend. We know much more about them than really we need. We have everything that we need to know about these people in order to customize the experience. So if they are the frequent high spender during the week because it's company funded, but then the good news is that what we want is for them to choose us for that once or twice a year leisure trip where they may not spend as much, but we should absolutely look after them. We should extend relevant benefits to them, whether that's the once in a lifetime sort of upgrade when you're traveling with a family, or, you know what, twice a year you can access the lounge with 3 people rather than just yourself and one, so that you don't have to leave someone outside. So I think it really comes down to, we know enough about these people to tailor and target our offering accordingly. So we've just got to use the data and make sure that we do that.
So picking up on those points, I mean, there's no secret that the zeitgeist in the industry, rightly or wrongly, over the last few years, has been to devalue certainly the earning proposition for lower spending customers. And we can go as far as to even talk about basic economy fares. Where if you buy the cheapest fare, you no longer have access to elite benefits that you may already have earned due to your previous behavior in spending lots to earn those elite benefits. You don't get to access them if you buy the cheapest fare. And it's not just in the last couple of years. I think back years and years and years to airlines like United and Qantas, who introduced minimum fare buckets to be able to even apply for an upgrade on international flights. And that, members didn't particularly object to those, but those fare buckets were reasonably modest as well. And it wasn't in your face that, sorry, if you buy the cheapest fare this week, no soup for you, even though you might be somebody who spends $100,000 a year on our airline, but today you're flying with your family, back to the back of the line for you, please. And you're getting a middle seat by the lavatory. Is it time that as program managers that we need to rethink some of this kind of, I'm going to refer to it as the zeitgeist of eliminating accrual benefits, and not just accrual benefits, Hubert, you're right on that. I shouldn't just focus on that, but eliminating benefits and earnings for people on the lowest fares. Do we need to, taking your point, Nick, we need to take a more holistic view, and Hubert, you said they're the same person often. Should programs be reviewing those devaluations to make sure that regardless of the fare that you're purchasing, that the earning velocity is sufficient so that your program remains relevant to as broad a base as possible? A quick comment from Peter Gerstle, I think, is great here. He said he suggests now's the time to rethink a program's reach and relevance, even for the best well-run loyalty programs. Thoughts on that?
Well, I think, David, what you have to guarantee as a program manager, and I think the direction you have to work is, you need to make sure that you have a fully engaged membership membership base over all segments. You shouldn't only have very engaged members in the higher tiers, in the high spend tiers. You need to make sure that engagement happens over the entire member base. Mm-hmm. If you don't have that engagement, you will have disengagement, and eventually, certainly, what we always discuss also breakage. And nobody wants to have breakage, because breakage is, in a way, certainly also failure of what we all are doing. Because in the very end, we had certain acquisition costs for a member. So my key message, I think, here is, and you're right, velocity has to be there. Because if you don't see velocity, you don't have confidence as a customer that the program is of value for you. And if you don't have that confidence, you will never, ever deliver also and give your loyalty.
Nick?
Yeah, well, I think understanding the economics of a loyalty program, it's just not viable to give the same level of earn on a low fare bucket. And I fully appreciate that. And I think that it's fine to devalue based on a very low yield product that they're buying, and revenue earning goes a long way to fixing that. Mm-hmm. But what they should be doing is they should still be extending these either status, or that they can make it status credits cost nothing. If this person is spending $100,000 with you over the year and then buys a couple of cheap fares, why not let them earn the same level of status credits, or continue to have the benefits that they would have, or they should get those anyway, but things like extending it. If they know it's a leisure trip and it is a family trip, then let them take them in the lounge. I know that there's a cost attached to that, but when you model it, it's probably a lot cheaper to do that than say, look, every cheap fare that you buy from us, we're going to give you your 25% bonus for accrual. That's just not economically viable. So I think that we need to look for levers that we can pull that don't break the bank. Mm-hmm. And status credits are really good for that, because aside lounge access, yes, there's a cost to it. But many of the things, and if we do rethink the status proposition, then we can do things that don't cost us anything, but are still rewarding. In fact, might be more rewarding than a trickle of earn rate.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, we're talking in absolutes here, but the reality is, everything exists on a continuum. And when we talk about, for example, I open the question with, make sure there's sufficient earning velocity. But if you think about it a different way, Nick, to your point, we don't necessarily have to be, everybody gets a pony when you buy a $10 airfare, particularly in Southeast Asia. It doesn't have to be like that. But, when you are instituting things such as, either overtly or indirectly, minimum spends for elite status, and you start pushing those up, United before this crisis had pushed their top tier status up to $18,000 for top tier status, plus taxes and charges. So you're spending a lot more than $18,000 as a minimum, plus the flights. When you start getting up to that, and considering, especially when we think about US airlines, and if you're not top tier status, you basically have no status. So there really only is one status level realistically. You're then firing a bunch of customers who might not be buying $10 airfares. You're potentially firing a bunch of customers that are spending $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 a year, and I'm thinking since the introduction of minimum spends just in the US market, and I know the rest of the world looks very closely at what the US airlines, CFOs at other airlines around the world look at what US airlines do and then go to their loyalty managers and say, well, why don't you just copy them? I mean, we know that's what goes on. So, I don't mind talking about the US airlines here. Is a $10,000 to $15,000 a year flyer the type of flyer you want to fire? Or, is there a middle ground there that, you have to recognize people who are giving you a large share of wallet. You have to recognize people who are giving you the frequency, who are giving you a level of value across the year. Someone who's spending $10,000, $15,000 on your year is still one of your top few percent of flyers. Even if you want to draw a line, at 18,000 or 24,000 or wherever you want to fit it, you want to make sure you're not excluding people who are still, by any definition of the word, valuable to your airline or your hotel, or your retail program for that matter. I mean, Nick, just to kind of dive a little bit deeper into your comment there.
I think, though, there's a lot of very smart people at United and everywhere else, and they've done their analysis. Mm-hmm. And they have to set a level somewhere for this tier, the elite tier that they've created. So whether you draw it at 18,000 or 15,000, you have to draw it somewhere. And there always are going to be people that are excluded. I think that the challenge in this is making those people that do spend that $18,000 plus a year, and I know Singapore Airlines have done it very successfully for many years. You mm-hmm. feel so special when you hit that. There's no doubt. And they look after you and they spend the money on you. But then to my point earlier, I still believe that we need to rethink these elite programs, because it's fine to have that top tier of frequent flyers that spend a lot of money and they're the classic kind of business traveler generally that get that top tier benefit. But is there another package of benefits that we should be giving to the person who's spending hundreds of thousands a year on their card and pouring lots of money into my program, but maybe aren't flying on as expensive tickets and therefore don't qualify for that top tier, maybe not even for the second tier? So what are we doing for them and other people to make them feel special, not break the bank, and also not detract from the value of getting in that very high value frequent flyer tier, which I think needs to stay there. Mm-hmm. But we do need to look at a more distributed or more segmented approach to elite programs, especially as programs become more frequent spender or frequent shopper or frequent e-commerce buyer. What are we doing to recognize them and give them benefits? If they're only flying once a year, then what's the point of giving them loads of flying benefits as their status award? You'd be better off doing more of a gamification type of approach, which is, if you spend this much on Amazon, then you'll get these benefits. And they all come from this program still, but it's really just segmenting the status program or the elite program in the same way that we try and segment our other marketing.
What I'm taking away from that, Nick, and to Hubert's earlier comments is, we're really advocating here a wider or broader inclusionary approach to the membership rather than an exclusion. So to my example that I gave with the illustration of elite status, you set a line and basically anyone who's below that line, basically no suit for you, you're not welcome here, go elsewhere. And which is, of course, the last thing you want to do, or that's the last message you want to send to somebody who spends, say, $10,000 to $15,000 a year, to my example. To your point, and to everything we've sort of talked about so far, is we need to open our minds, and we need to think, how can we be most relevant to the widest number of members or potential members or customers who are engaged with our brand in some way or form, and how can we maximize the incrementality that we can get from that customer and the relationship we can get from that customer through their channel of engagement, at their level of engagement. And there's an interesting question that's come through from Mike Gavich. For the business flyers, who should we consider the customer? The company that pays the bills, the person who's flying? Or what about the family member of that person when he or she takes them on that once-a-year trip? Who has the most influence on the selection of the airline? I mean, it's a fantastic question. I mean, because I think to myself, in a previous life, I used to work in the ski industry, and with children's ski schools, when we did lifetime value calculations there, I mean, one of the things that always stood out to me from a very young age for myself is that the lifetime value of that family, in terms of, and we're generally talking about more affluent, people who take an annual ski vacation, typically veer a little bit towards the more affluent, just like people who take, international, air travel. The greatest lifetime value came when the kids had the best experience possible, because you've got a nagging kid in their single digits who's, the minute they go home, spends the next 51 weeks hassling mum and dad for when are we going to go back, on that ski vacation again. parents pull out the credit card pretty quickly on that. To Mike's question, Hubert, I mean, what about other incentives? We hinted earlier about sales and distribution channel incentives. We spend all this time talking about loyalty programs providing the incentive for behavior, whether it's points and miles, whether it's elite status, whether it's co-brand, some form of co-brand recognition or benefits. But there's other incentives that are part of that mix. Can I ask you if you could put your commercial hat on and maybe speak about that a little bit?
It's actually a quite scary thought, I would say. Quite scary for a CFO. I would say it's quite scary also for auditors and for all the colleagues in the financial departments, and including the colleagues in revenue management. Because if you really kind of fillet it, you spoke earlier about the managed travel. As an airline, let's assume the airline operates also the frequent flyer program and it's not a spin-off. But as an airline, you spend certainly some money and pay the TMC for managing that travel. You spend also money and pay the corporate account for a corporate fare agreement. That could be an incentive, but could also be discounted corporate fares. So you have already twice incentives or discounts or whatever you want to name it. At least you have revenue flows leaving the airline and incentivizing and buying actually business. And last but not least, you have the traveler who has basically no say in it, but he still benefits from the incentive of receiving the miles, which adds another element and layer of cost for the airline. So I would say, I think we don't deploy our resources in the most efficient way. And it is probably also something in future. I mean, I'm not advocating to take away right away the miles from travelers who are traveling on a corporate managed agreement. But it is something that I think the product designers have to consider, have to look at thoroughly together, for instance, with revenue management, because this is not an efficient spend of resources, especially financial resources.
Nick, thoughts on that? If we widen our minds to that, loyalty isn't the only incentive in the mix influencing the travel.
Yeah, I think there's also extensions of it's not just about the customer loyalty program here. We've got other types of program operating in the channel. So whether that's with a travel agent, there's also another very successful set of programs that aim at corporate bookers, where they're doing all the bookings for the department, and they've got some level of discretion on what they book, because maybe there's more than one airline in the agreement, so they have agreements with airlines, they have agreements with hotels, and they get some level of choice. So I think there are a number of different layers of incentives, and some are more effective than others. I think that obviously if you can get a managed agreement, a direct corporate agreement between an airline and a company, that has to be the best way, though obviously sometimes it's quite expensive. But what you don't then want to be doing is layering on all of the rewards and costs on top of it, because to Hubert's point, you're double, triple dipping, especially if you've got a corporate booker who's earning from your corporate booker program, you've got the end traveler, and then you've got some arrangement with a company, and maybe there's even a corporate travel agent in the middle of it all. You've got 4 layers then. So I do think you need to be careful, but they obviously work because they're all still there and in place. It's just difficult to balance them and make sure that they're all still economically viable.
I think it's a fascinating point, and I mean, I've prodded you guys on a couple of aspects, and we keep talking about this continuum of flyers and managed corporate travelers versus unmanaged corporate travelers. And, it appears to me that the takeaway, it's not as simplistic as simply choosing, look, I'm obviously going to look after my super high value flyers and I'm going to overinvest in them. There's a question of whether I then in return underinvest in infrequent travelers. Okay, that's a separate question. But I think the takeaway here is that it's actually not as simple as just saying I need to give my high value customers more, because they're spending the most. Well, actually, maybe the person who's spending the most is actually already heavily incentivized outside of loyalty, And if you just continue incentivizing them through loyalty, which is your choice, but you're actually just laying on additional marketing costs, potentially not generating additional incrementality. But I think the danger here, my takeaway from all of this is I think the danger is there's nothing wrong with giving more to people who spend more. And if you want to incur additional marketing costs and you're comfortable with that because you're layering on channel and distribution incentives, that's okay. That's your choice. But when you do that at the expense of taking away from, I'm going to say, call it the unmanaged traveler who isn't receiving those other channel incentives, but whose travel could be incentivized to give you additional incremental revenue, whether that's through core product behavior, hotel stays or airline flights, or Nick, to your point, what about co-brand relationships? What about on-the-ground behavior that's going to generate billings revenue to your program? These segments clearly shouldn't be ignored. We've got a few minutes left, so I want to kind of bring us back to the core topic to wrap up. And that is the topic is balancing member value versus program profits. And the topic is a little controversial in the sense that it suggests that there is a trade-off, that these are opposite ends of the spectrum. If you choose one, you don't get the other. Are they more symbiotic, member value and program profits? Are they more symbiotic than that? Hubert?
Well, in general, I think, short term, it looks like, as if there is a kind of trade-off. It's either profitability or member value. Redemption comes as a cost versus the long-term overall commercial revenue outperformance through engagement of active redeemers. So what I really believe is, there is data evidence that, redemption is a good thing. Engagement is a good thing. Redemption means revenue for the airline, reduction of liability, and so on and so on. So I believe what we really have to understand, we are in that for the long term, and it's not a short-term trade-off between profitability and member value. And I think you see also examples in the design of programs where you can clearly see that member value and program profitability, or the profitability of the Cosmos in the case of an airline and its FFP, that in the program design you see examples that both is possible. Let's say we speak about, rich earning propositions during tier status runs. We would definitely see there's a high elasticity and an overall positive transactional value for the airline. Or, if we speak about product elements and features like confirmed upgrades at an early stage, but link them to higher fare brands. Also here, you have a certain revenue quality which you generate, but at the same time, the confirmed upgrade is a value in itself for the member base.
Yeah, excellent point, Nick.
So I'm going to say, look, there's no trade-off whatsoever between profit of a program and member value. For me, they're totally independent, because profit of a program is not coming from the reward or the airline. It's coming from the amount of revenue they can generate from partners via credit card, but also commissions, sale of data or insights, and media. So all of the revenues, for me, that's where they're coming from, and the profits are coming from there. Where the value to the members is coming from is really dependent on the choice of reward. So airlines can afford to give incredible value on flights, on first class, business class, upgrades, and we've seen that over the years, that they can afford to give that, providing they've got capacity. So therefore, the model really works well if that was it. But the problem comes when you extend the redemption portfolio to other rewards, as we've seen. You can get a rice cooker. You can get all these kind of things from your loyalty program with an airline, and they don't necessarily add up to very good value. But that's not because the program is looking to make more profit, except if you follow the whole string through, which is they're making more profit because they're selling all these points and miles to banks that they then can't figure out how to get redeemed. So they have to expand the redemption portfolio. And that's why the sort of member value is suffering. But I think ultimately there is no direct link between between program profitability and member value, because you've got that third party in there, which is the partner that's funding the whole thing.
Yeah. Fantastic. Fantastic insights. We are coming to time. I want to thank my guests, Hubert Frage and Nick Lemming. Thank you so much for your insights. I also want to thank our sponsors of Loyalty Summit, Engage, Amia, Nick, your former employer there, Adara, Hilton, who is the hotel sponsor for our New York Loyalty Summit, Radisson Rewards, who's the sponsor for our London Loyalty Summit. And don't forget to go to loyaltysummit.com to stay up to date on the latest news regarding our in-person events, our physical in-person events. We look forward to holding them again. Hopefully you'll both be able to attend when we do. And for those interested in next week's webcast, Loyalty Leader Insights on the 5th of May, don't forget it is going to be 2 hours earlier next week. We're going to be talking about reinventing loyalty programs, and we have a stellar lineup of guests for you for next week. So stay tuned on our LinkedIn page for updates on that and to be able to register. And if you missed the rest of today's session, or you want to see the previous replays, don't forget our YouTube channel as well. Thank you again to our guests, Nick Lemming and Hubert Frage, and we'll catch everybody next week. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.